إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى. Dear brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, we begin today by praising Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send peace and blessings upon the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his companions, and upon all those who have treaded in their footsteps of righteousness and piety. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah make our gathering here today, our presence and attendance, a beneficial one. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us hidayah, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the correct teachings of the Quran and of the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and may Allah allow us to practice it and put it into our lives. Ameen. Dear brothers and sisters, 2 weeks ago we began our discussion on Surah Duha. We spoke about the first few ayahs of Surah Duha, the first 4 ayahs of Surah Duha, and we went over its relevance to us in our daily lives and how it can affect our lives today. And today we want to move forward and finish off the rest of this surah, this beautiful surah. But before we do so, we want to refresh everyone's memory as to what we spoke about so that everyone's on the same page and we can move forward smoothly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Duha at an occasion during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Prophet ﷺ wasn't feeling too well. He wasn't feeling too well physically, he wasn't feeling too well emotionally. The Prophet ﷺ was going through a very difficult time in his life. And the reason why the surah is so important for us to remember and understand in today's time is many of us are in that situation where we feel as though we're in a place of complete hopelessness. We're in a place of complete frustration and helplessness. We feel as though sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has abandoned us. We sometimes feel as though Allah's mercy and hope is nowhere near. And especially if you're someone who stays aware and updated of all the things that are going around in the world, you see it and you begin to tell yourself, we have such a bleak and dark future ahead of us. And you would tell yourself, there's nothing good going on in the world. And because of that, it can really make a person feel depressed, gloomy, sad, and completely make that person lose hope in everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised for them and the believers. And this was a very similar circumstance during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To refresh everyone's memory, Surah Duha was revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam during a time when the Prophet, the enemies of Islam were many, and the believers were very, very few. This was a time when his neighbor, the wife of Abu Lahab, came to the Prophet. She saw that the Prophet ﷺ had been physically sick for about 3 to 4 days. He wasn't feeling strong. He was in a very weak situation, and he was in a lot of pain physically. And because of his pain, the Prophet ﷺ did not get up to pray his tahajjud salah for the past 3 to 4 days. This was the habit of the Prophet ﷺ, that he would wake up in the middle of the night and offer his tahajjud salah. But during those 3 to 4 days, the Prophet ﷺ was a human being. And like all humans, like all of us, from time to time, we get sick, we need to recover, we need to take a break. And this was the situation with the Prophet ﷺ. He was recovering from some pain and sickness and illness. And for those 3 to 4 days, he was not able to wake up for tahajjud salah. He was recovering, he was resting. And his neighbor, who was the wife of Abu Lahab, and if you know Abu Lahab, he was one of the staunch enemies of the Prophet and of Islam. So the wife of Abu Lahab saw this, and she came to the Prophet and said, I realized you haven't been praying to your God for the past 3 or 4 days. I hope this continues, and I hope, you're not going to go around and spreading your message anymore, your message of the devil, right? In other words, she's saying that, what you're spreading to people, what you're teaching people is a lie, and it's a message from the devil, and I hope you finally understood and learned your lesson that, you have to stop this. And at this point, the Prophet ﷺ, obviously he was the messenger of Allah. He was he always had contact with Jibreel alayhi salam, and he would imagine that the Prophet ﷺ had iman that was very, very strong, and that if anyone said anything to the Prophet ﷺ, it would not waver his iman. Of course, the Prophet's iman was strong. There's no doubt about it. The Prophet ﷺ's iman is the highest. But the point we're making over here is that even with the Prophet ﷺ, when people would say derogatory things to the Prophet, when people would call the Prophet a liar, a magician, and tell the Prophet what you're saying, what you're believing is completely false, this had an effect even on the Prophet ﷺ. And at times it didn't cause any doubt in the iman of the Prophet. Understand it very clearly. It didn't cause any doubt, but it did make him feel sad, because to the Prophet he's saying, I'm doing all this work, I'm calling the people towards hidayah, towards the salvation, and they're not accepting it. And to the Prophet it felt like he was just working, and there was no results coming by. That he's preaching, he's giving this gift to the people, and the people are not accepting it. The people are not seeing the value of this gift that the Prophet ﷺ is giving to them. And therefore it made the Prophet ﷺ feel sad, and it made the Prophet ﷺ lose a little bit. We don't want to say lose hope. We have to be very careful about the way we describe the Prophet ﷺ. But it made him feel not so enthusiastic about going out and calling the people ﷺ, because of their approach and their reaction to the Prophet ﷺ. But nevertheless, in the first few ayahs of Surah Duha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reassuring the Prophet and reminding the Prophet ﷺ that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not abandoned you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not angry with you. مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Allah is not, مَا وَدَّعَكَ means Allah did not abandon you. Right? Don't think that just because you're going through a little bit of difficulty right now, just because you're facing opposition, just because there's people against you, people are saying bad things to you, don't assume that Allah has forgotten about you. Don't assume that Allah has left you. Right? مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ. That Allah hasn't left you. وَمَا قَلَى. And because of these circumstances, because of these tribulations, don't assume that Allah is angry with you either. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reassuring the Prophet ﷺ that Allah did not leave you and Allah is not angry with you. Rather, everything that's happening, even to the Prophet ﷺ, all the difficulties the Prophet ﷺ went through, all the abuse that the Prophet ﷺ went through, all the harassment that the Prophet ﷺ went through, it's a normal part of everyone's life. Everyone will go through these difficulties, whether they are a Muslim or whether they are not a Muslim, whether they believe in a God, whether they don't believe in God, whether they're atheist or a believer. Everyone will go through difficulties in life. And what Allah is reminding us as believers, that Allah is not angry with you and Allah did not leave you. Don't think because you're going through these difficulties, Allah is mad at you or Allah is angry with you or Allah has left you. Right? So Allah is making that very, very clear. Now, moving forward, so that was the main message of the first 4 ayahs of Surah Duha, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that despite the difficulties the Prophet ﷺ was going through, Allah reminded and reassured the Prophet that Allah did not leave the Prophet, Allah did not abandon the Prophet, and Allah is not angry with the Prophet. So us as believers, when we read this surah, when we read the Quran in general, this is a reminder for us as well, that even the Prophet went through difficulty. And the Prophet was the most noblest creation, the most beloved of creation. And therefore, if Allah put the Prophet through difficulty, then obviously we're going to go through some difficulty as well. But when we face that difficulty, we should not take it or interpret it in the sense that Allah is angry with us. And because Allah is angry with us, Allah is putting us through difficulty. That's not what it means. Right? If a person is going through difficulty, as a believer, we should always take it the proper way. We should interpret those difficulties in the correct way. And now, before we move on to the next ayahs, we want to remind everyone of the hadith that we left off with from our last discussion, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Ajaban li amri al-mu'min, inna amrahu kullahu khayr." That how marvelous and how fascinating is the matter of the believer. Meaning the affairs of the believer, that the different affairs and the different issues and the different situations that the believer goes through, how wonderful and how amazing is it that despite whatever it may be, the believer is always content. And there's always good for that believer. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, وَلَيْسَ ذَاكَ لِأَحَدٍ إِلَّا لِلْمُؤْمِنِ. And that is only true for a believer, only true for a Muslim. Why? Because they understand the secrets behind what's happening. They understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control. They understand that there's wisdom behind everything that is going and everything that is happening. And the hadith mentions, in asabathu sarra shakara, that if some good happens to them, if some sort of some fortunate event happens to them, right? They praise Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ, and it's something good for them. وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ ضَرًّا صَبَرَ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. And if something unfortunate, we don't want to use the word evil, we want to say something unfortunate or inconvenient happens to the believer, then they remain steadfast, they remain patient. They continue to obey and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't let it sidetrack them, they don't let it detract them. And because of their patience, فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ, it's something beneficial for them. And this is only true for a Muslim, this is only true for a believer, someone who understands the wisdom behind the difficulties and the different situations that they go through. Because they understand there's wisdom, it's with the command of Allah, and therefore there's something good in it for us. Now moving forward with the rest of the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى, that speak to the Prophet ﷺ, that soon indeed we will give you tremendous amounts of things and it will make you happy, it will make you content. Right? Now the scholars of tafsir, they mentioned many different things because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't specify exactly what He's giving to the Prophet. He's simply saying, we will give you and you will be happy. So the question is, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to give the Prophet? Right? There's a few there's a few interpretations and there's a few commentaries that the scholars of tafsir have mentioned. One is that inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the Prophet on the Day of Judgment complete forgiveness for his ummah, because this was one of the greatest desires for the Prophet ﷺ, one of the greatest desires of the Prophet, to see that all the people who believed in the Prophet ﷺ enter into Jannah. So some of the scholars, they mention this is the gift which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give to the Prophet. And how does this tie up? Because again, as we mentioned, that the surah was revealed at a time when the disbelievers of the people who disbelieved in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam were against the Prophet. That the Prophet was, continuously trying to give them this gift, warning them that, listen, what you're doing, you're leading yourself to destruction. The way you're living your life, the way you're behaving, the things that you're doing, your future does not look bright, right? You're heading down the wrong path. And the Prophet's warning them, being compassionate to them. And yet, they're heedless. So the Prophet's concern was that I'm trying to help people, and they're not responding. And this caused grief in the heart of the Prophet. And therefore, the scholars, they mention, don't worry about this temporary grief. On the Day of Judgment, you'll see that everyone who believed in you, Allah will put them into Jannah. Right? Another commentary that the scholars provide is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah will give you and you will be pleased, it's referring to that on the Day of Judgment, Allah will grant Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam the shafa'ah. On the Day of Judgment, when everyone will be in a state of panic and fear, people will be going around to the different prophets, the different Anbiya alayhi wasallam. They'll go to Adam alayhi salam, they'll go to Ibrahim, they'll go to Musa, they'll go to Isa alayhi salam, they'll go to Nuh alayhi salam, and they'll say, can you please intercede on our behalf and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to begin the Day of Judgment. And then each one of these Anbiya alayhi salam, each one of these prophets will decline. They'll say, we're too concerned about ourselves. Imagine the prophets are saying this. The prophets, the chosen people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're saying, we're concerned about ourselves. We don't have the heart and the courage to approach Allah and ask Him for this favor and ask Him for this request. Finally, the people will go to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ will approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let us begin with the judgment and enter people into Jannah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will begin with that judgment. So, and this is considered to be a very great virtue and something very noble. So this is one of the things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless the Prophet ﷺ with. And then other scholars have mentioned that on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give the Prophet ﷺ the Hawd Kawthar, which is the fountain of Kawthar, which is if a person drinks from that fountain of water, then that person will never experience any sort of thirst. And on the Day of Judgment, when everyone is in panic and chaos and very, very thirsty, because on the Day of Judgment, the sun will be very close to the people. It'll be very, very close. And because of that, people will be sweating, they'll be thirsty, and whoever is fortunate enough to drink from this fountain, that person will not experience any sort of thirst again. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those people who are allowed to drink. So, some of the scholars, they mention that this is the gift which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give to the Prophet ﷺ. But nevertheless, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left it general, and many scholars have said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless the Prophet with many things in this world and many things in the hereafter, and that's what we can simply assume, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant ultimate victory to the Prophet ﷺ, that everything that the Prophet ﷺ is working towards, everything that the Prophet ﷺ is striving for, all the sacrifices that the Prophet ﷺ made, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fulfill the Prophet ﷺ's desires and eventually give to the Prophet ﷺ. And when we look at this world, right, we see the system of this world. Whether the person be a believer or a person, not even believe, forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, forget Islam. Even a person who's an atheist, who doesn't believe in a God. We see that the system of this world is, if a person puts in the effort, the time, and they remain consistent and committed, eventually they will get what they're working towards. They will get what they work for. If a person works for years and years and years to achieve one thing, right? Their goal is to do one thing, and they work behind that, making that one thing come true for 5 years, 6 years, and they work every single day, day after day, day after day, and it may seem like they're making no progress, but 5, 6 years down the line, you see that they've made a huge accomplishment, right? But that's the system of this world. And that is what we're learning from this ayah. That if you work towards something, Allah will give it to you. Right? And it doesn't mean, you don't have to be a Muslim for that. Right? That's just from the mercy and compassion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if you work towards something, Allah will give it to you. Right? It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of work. But eventually Allah will give it to you. That's the system of this world. And this is what this ayah is referring to and reassuring Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That all this difficulty you're going through, your entire life, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, imagine 23 years of giving da'wah, 23 years of taking abuse and harassment. 23 years is not a small amount of time. 23 years is more than a quarter of a person's life. 23 years is at times half of a person's lifespan. And the Prophet is every single day going through this abuse, going through this harassment, and every single day the Prophet ﷺ is calling people towards Allah. The Prophet ﷺ is teaching the people the deen. And you look at the days of the Prophet ﷺ, each day, and it seems like there's no progress being made. You see some of the battles that the Prophet ﷺ fought. You see that one victory here, one victory there. What does it really mean? But fast forward, after 1500 years, you see the benefit, you see the fruits of the sacrifice of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is what the ayah is saying, that Allah will give you and you will be pleased. Right? 23 years of sacrifice, and now you see around 1.7 billion believers in the Prophet ﷺ. 1.7 billion people who love and believe in Rasulullah ﷺ, who have dedicated their lives for the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding the Prophet Don't worry, the difficulty you're going through is temporary. But if you remain consistent, Allah will give you and you will be pleased. And that's the promise which Allah is making the Prophet, and that's the promise which Allah is making to us. Right? Because when Allah is speaking to the Prophet, the Quran is for all of us. So Allah is speaking to all of us as well. And that's a reminder for all of us, that continue to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And don't worry about the difficulties you're going through. Right? Allah will give us, and and the amount that Allah will give us, it will make us happy. فَتَرْضَى. It'll satisfy you. It'll please you. Right? So this is what we need to keep in mind. That, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give someone this world for putting in effort, then of course Allah will give us the hereafter, the akhirah, if we put in the effort as well. And in today's time, what's the most difficult, one of the most difficult things to do when it comes to our deen? It's simply to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the reality of it is, we do not live in a Muslim country. We do not live in we're not always in situations and circumstances where people are accepting and tolerant towards Muslims, right? We live in a country where our lifestyle is at times very different from the lifestyle in the society that is around us. And because of this societal pressure, because of this influence, it can be very difficult to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and live our lives accordingly. And there's there's a few ways you can go. You can either completely reject everything, and there's unfortunately people who completely leave Islam, right? Why? Because of this pressure that they receive from society, right? They may be the only family, they may be the only Muslim in that society, in that community, in that neighborhood, and everyone else around them is not Muslim. And they see this, and because of this pressure, they leave Islam, right? And they'll tell you whatever excuses, they'll say, oh, I don't believe in God, all these things or whatnot, or, Islam doesn't make sense to me and stuff like that, right? But at the end of the day, what it really boils down to is the fact that they're surrounded in an environment which is pushing them away from the deen, right? That's one way a person can go. The second way a person can go is they remain Muslim, they say they believe in Allah, but they're going to now modify it. They're going to change it in order so that Islam is just a name they have. Yeah, I'm a Muslim. But but after work, yeah, let's go to the bar and drink. Yeah, I'm a Muslim, but let's go ahead and celebrate this and celebrate that. SubhanAllah, it's, and people justify it. People come and they say, well, I celebrate this and I celebrate that. It's not a big deal. They'll justify it. Of course it's a big deal. You're celebrating a complete different religion. How do you not see the big deal in that? Right? So that's the second way you can go. You can remain a Muslim, but you're going to modify it. You're going to change it so that fitting in becomes easy for you. Right? And then the last way is you can stay steadfast. You can remain a Muslim. And keep in mind, being a Muslim doesn't mean you're going to be some awkward person in society. That, you're going to be a complete opposite person, right? Yes, there are going to be differences. There are going to be things where, we can't always do and say, right? But everyone has their own beliefs and everyone has their own ways of life, right? So the third way is where we remain steadfast on our deen. And when it comes to those situations where we have to be Muslim, or let's put it like this, where it's awkward to be Muslim, we explain ourselves and we say, we can't participate in this. And we move forward with life, right? And that is the hardest thing to do. Well, the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentions that a time will come when holding on to the deen will be as though holding on to the charcoal, holding on to burning charcoal, right? If you've ever touched a hot pan or a hot pot, right? You can't hold it. If you have a cup of coffee which is steaming hot and you try holding it, you'll burn your hand, right? If you want to try it, go to McDonald's, order coffee, spill it on yourself, and you can sue McDonald's. Some lady did that before, right? She ordered coffee and she spilled it on herself, and she sued McDonald's because the coffee was too hot, right? But that's a different story. So if you ever try holding a hot cup of coffee or tea, you'll notice you can't hold it for too long, right? You put it down in 2 seconds. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is saying that a time will come when holding on to the deen, when practicing the deen becomes so difficult, it's like you're holding on to charcoal, to burning charcoal. That's how difficult it will become to practice the deen, right, at these times. And wallahi, at certain occasions, at certain times, for different people, this is how it is. And if we think our situation is difficult, right, we have, yes, there is difficulty, no doubt. For some people it's very difficult. But we have to really put ourselves into perspective. We are not in places like Burma, where people are being killed for being Muslim, right? We're not in that situation. No one's killing us for being a Muslim, right? Yeah, people may say, that's kind of weird, or why don't you do this? Or you may lose a few friends, right? But no one's killing you. No one's burning down your home. No one's taking all your stuff. No one's killing your family, right? So we really have to put this into perspective. For people, for the people who grew up in this country, who were born in this country, sometimes we forget the reality of this world. Sometimes we forget that we live in a first world country, that our problems are very minor compared to what people are facing all over the world, right? And for people who grew up in areas like this, we sometimes forget that right across the block, there are people who live in tents, right? If you don't believe that, drive down to Camden. You'll see people living in tents, right? We had a winter storm, a snowstorm just a few days ago. Imagine not having a home. Imagine living in a tent, right? There are people like that just 30 minutes away from where we live. It's the reality. So sometimes we forget about this, and our minor problems may be a crack on our phone. And we see that crack on our phone and we think, oh man, my life is the worst. I have this crack on my phone, all my friends have the latest phone, right? Or I drive this car and my friends have the best car. And you feel like, you're going into a state of depression. SubhanAllah, sometimes we have to wake up and realize the entitlement that we really live in, right? SubhanAllah. But moving forward, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the remedy and the cure behind this a feeling of sadness and grief. And inshallah we'll cover that in the second part of our khutbah. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن المجيد ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات وذكر الحكيم أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته. Dear brothers and sisters, in the second part of Surah Duha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us the remedy, the cure to tackling sadness and grief. Now before we get into that, we want to make it very clear that there are people who suffer real depression, clinical depression, where there may be an imbalance of hormones, right? And that's a real thing. And for individuals who suffer from that, they need to seek medical treatment and professional help. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the ups and downs that we have in life. We're talking about, sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad. We're talking about someone in your family passes away and you're sad. That's normal. That doesn't mean you have depression, right? That means it's a normal part of life. right? We're talking about you lose money, you lose your business, you lose your job. Of course you're going to feel sad, right? Of course you're going to be in a state of anxiety and worry, right? These are normal parts of our lives. These are normal situations of our life. So this is what we're speaking about. We're not speaking about clinical depression, so please don't misunderstand this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the last part of, second part of Surah Duha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. First, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by promising the Prophet ﷺ that we will give you, and we will give you so much that you will be pleased. And then, in order to substantiate the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah is promising He's going to give us. But how do I know that promise is true? So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is proving His promise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that, do you remember that أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى, that you were an orphan and we gave you a family, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is substantiating His claim. Allah is saying, we will give you, and we will give you so much that you will be content and satisfied. And how do you know our promise is true? Because we've helped you in the past. We've given you in the past. And if we gave it to you in the past, then inshallah we will give you again. Right? So the first thing Allah is mentioning, that weren't you an orphan? Speaking to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ lost his mother. The Prophet ﷺ lost his father at a very early age. And he was an orphan. So Allah is reminding him that, don't you remember, you were an orphan. And if you're an orphan, if you don't have parents to take care of you, you're pretty much left in a very, very vulnerable, in a very sensitive situation where people can take advantage of you, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, weren't you an orphan and we gave you protection, right? We put you under the protection of your uncle and he protected you, he took care of you. And then the next thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى, that did we not give you guidance? That prior to giving you the Quran, what did you know about the hereafter? What did you know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What did you know about Islam and Hidayah? Right? It's not to say the Prophet was misguided, so don't misunderstand it. It's not saying that the Prophet was misguided. The ayah is saying that you did not have guidance to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah gave you the prophethood, and Allah gave you the Quran and granted you guidance. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى, that did not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala find you in a situation where you were not wealthy, and then Allah granted you wealth. فَأَغْنَى, Allah made you independent of the needs of other people. So Allah is reminding the Prophet ﷺ that we'll give you, and if you want to prove our promise, we gave you in the past, so we'll give you in the future, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. That فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. Now it's a complete shift. And if you don't pay attention, you're not going to realize the subtlety. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, as for the orphans, فَلَا تَقْهَرْ, do not abuse them. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. And as for the people who are in need, who ask you for help, don't reproach them. Don't, shun them. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. And as for the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَحَدِّثْ, mention them. Right? Because we're running out of time, we'll make this very short. When you read these ayahs, there's two things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning. Or two things which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us. First is reminding ourselves of the blessings which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given us. And number two is helping people who need help. Right? So the cure to or the remedy to cure grief, sorrow, and sadness is, number one, by reminding yourself of the blessings which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. And وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ, and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those blessings. Right? That's the first thing. We underestimate the power of gratitude. When we remind ourselves of all the blessings which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, right? You shift your attention. You take your attention away from all the bad things and you put your attention on all the good things that's happened. Right? And that's automatically going to change your state of mind. And then the second thing which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. As for the people who are in need of help, help them, right? Assist them. Meaning sometimes it's not simply enough to remind ourselves, but sometimes we need an even stronger dosage of that cure. And we have to be in the people who need help, right? I was in that situation and now I'm helping those people. Because sometimes we forget reality, right? That we live in such an entitled environment that even when we watch the news, even when we hear of stories, it doesn't hit us. It doesn't hit reality. Sometimes we have to be in those situations. Sometimes we have to be involved with those people to realize and understand reality. That there are other people who have it much worse than us. So the ultimate secret behind this sadness, and again we're going to mention it because some people came in. We're not talking about clinical depression, right? We're talking about the ups and downs of life, right? When you're feeling down, the best cure to make yourself feel better is to remind yourself of the blessings of Allah and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's gratitude. And this is the ultimate message of Surah Duha. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand. I mean, إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروا الله يذكركم واشكروه ولا تكفرون أقيموا الصلاة